Marcus stood in the doorway of their bedroom, his wife's phone glowing in his hand, and felt his entire world collapse into a single, suffocating moment. The screen showed a conversation deleted from her main messages, but still cached in her cloud backup between Sophia and someone named Drew from the gym. The messages were explicit, detailed, and dated back 7 months, filled with plans to meet while Marcus worked late, and promises about leaving that clueless husband once she secured her half of everything. Marcus felt his knees weaken, his chest tighten, as if the air itself had turned to glass shards in his lungs. He scrolled through message after message, each one more damning than the last, his hands trembling so badly he nearly dropped the phone. Sophia had been careful. She'd deleted every text from her main inbox, cleared her call logs, even changed Drew's contact name to Sarah M. to throw Marcus off if he ever looked. But she'd forgotten one thing. Marcus was the one who'd set up her automatic cloud backups 2 years ago, and he still had the master password. He heard her car pull into the driveway, heard her heels clicking on the walkway, heard her humming some cheerful tune as if she hadn't just destroyed 13 years of marriage. That's when Marcus stopped shaking and started planning. Before we continue, I see you watching but not subscribing, and it's completely free. I bring you these powerful stories daily, and I'm racing toward 1,000 subscribers. Help me reach that goal. It takes just 2 seconds. Marcus stood in the doorway of their bedroom, his wife's phone glowing in his hand, and felt his entire world collapse into a single, suffocating moment. The screen showed a conversation deleted from her main messages, but still cached in her cloud backup between Sophia and someone named Drew from the gym. The messages were explicit, detailed, and dated back 7 months, filled with plans to meet while Marcus worked late, and promises about leaving that clueless husband once she secured her half of everything. Marcus felt his knees weaken, his chest tighten, as if the air itself had turned to glass shards in his lungs. He scrolled through message after message, each one more damning than the last, his hands trembling so badly he nearly dropped the phone. Sophia had been careful. She'd deleted every text from her main inbox, cleared her call logs, even changed Drew's contact name to Sarah M. to throw Marcus off if he ever looked. But she'd forgotten one thing. Marcus was the one who'd set up her automatic cloud backups 2 years ago, and he still had the master password. He heard her car pull into the driveway, heard her heels clicking on the walkway, heard her humming some cheerful tune as if she hadn't just destroyed 13 years of marriage. That's when Marcus stopped shaking and started planning. He slipped her phone back onto the nightstand exactly where she'd left it, his face a mask of calm, even though his heart was hammering against his ribs like a caged animal. Sophia walked in, kissed him on the cheek with those lying lips, and asked about his day with the kind of casual warmth that now felt like acid on his skin. Marcus smiled, told her work was fine, asked about her workout, and watched her lie straight to his face about how exhausting her training session had been. Every word she spoke was a performance, and he'd been the fool in the audience for months, applauding her deception while she made a mockery of their vows. The air between them felt thick with her dishonesty, and Marcus wondered how he'd missed it, the way she turned her phone face down automatically, the way she'd started showering immediately after coming home, the way she'd stopped initiating intimacy but blamed his work schedule. But Marcus wasn't going to confront her, not yet. Not when anger was all he had and she had 7 months of practice lying. Instead, he excused himself to his home office, closed the door, and opened his laptop with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. He accessed the cloud backup again, this time methodically downloading every message, every photo, every incriminating piece of evidence onto 3 separate encrypted external drives that he immediately stored in different locations. But Sophia had no idea what Marcus had found in her digital footprint. Over the next 72 hours, Marcus moved through his life like an actor who'd perfected his role, maintaining the facade of a trusting husband while his mind worked through scenarios with cold mechanical efficiency. He documented everything. The dates Sophia claimed to be at book club cross-referenced with messages arranging hotel rooms. The anniversary she'd been too tired to celebrate that coincided with an all-day rendezvous with Drew. Even the nights Marcus had worked late at her suggestion nights she'd used to bring Drew into their home, into their bed. The violation of it made Marcus's stomach turn, but he channeled that nausea into focus, creating spreadsheets and timelines that would make any divorce attorney weep with gratitude. He installed a discreet tracking app on the iPad they shared, the one Sophia sometimes used when her phone was charging, and watched her digital life unfold in He saw her Google searches for how to prepare for divorce without spouse knowing and protecting assets before separation, and realized with bitter clarity that she'd been planning this exit strategy while he'd been planning their 15th anniversary trip. Marcus called out sick from work on Wednesday, drove to 3 different law firms for consultations, and by Thursday afternoon had retained Patricia Morrison, an attorney whose reputation for ruthless efficiency in high-asset divorces preceded her like a winter storm. But the real surprise was waiting in Marcus's next move. Patricia listened to Marcus's story with the detached professionalism of someone who'd heard 1,000 variations of the same betrayal. But her eyes sharpened when he produced the evidence: printed transcripts of messages, cloud backup screenshots with timestamps, GPS data from the shared iPad showing Sophia's true locations. "This is exceptionally well documented," Patricia said, her manicured fingers tapping the folder. "Most clients come to me with suspicions and feelings. You've come with a prosecutable case." Marcus felt a grim satisfaction at those words, the first emotion beyond pain and rage that had felt remotely good in days. They discussed strategy, protecting his assets, ensuring Sophia couldn't claim ignorance or frame herself as the victim, timing the filing to maximize his advantage. Patricia recommended a forensic accountant named Richard Chen, who could trace every dollar Sophia had been quietly moving into her private account money she'd been skimming from their joint finances for months. Under the guise of household expenses, Marcus authorized both hirings, with a signature that felt like drawing a line in the sand. That evening, Sophia suggested they go out for dinner, her hand touching his arm with feigned affection, and Marcus agreed with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He watched her across the table at their favorite restaurant, watched her lie about her day, watched her check her phone and quickly turn it face down when a notification lit up the screen. She thought she was so careful, so clever. She had no idea Marcus owned her deception now. The forensic audit came back within a week, and the numbers told a story more damning than Marcus had imagined. Sophia had siphoned off $47,000 over 9 months, transferring it in increments small enough to avoid triggering alerts, but large enough to build a substantial escape fund. She'd opened credit cards in her name only, charged expensive dinners and hotel stays that Marcus had never benefited from, even purchased a plane ticket to Cancun for 2 departing 3 weeks after their anniversary trip Marcus knew nothing about. Richard's report documented every transaction, with dates that aligned perfectly with the affair timeline, creating an irrefutable pattern of financial infidelity alongside the emotional betrayal. Marcus met with Patricia again, this time bringing Richard's findings, and watched her smile the way a chess master smiles when they see checkmate 6 moves ahead. "With this documentation, we can argue dissipation of marital assets," Patricia explained. "Every dollar she spent on this affair can be recouped from her share of the settlement. We can also file for full custody of joint assets based on her deliberate financial deception." Marcus felt something close to satisfaction, though it was cold and hollow compared to the warmth he'd once felt in this marriage. He authorized Patricia to begin preparing the divorce filing, scheduled for delivery in exactly 2 weeks the day after Sophia's planned girls' weekend. That was actually a romantic getaway with Drew, but Sophia still thought she was running the show, and that delusion was about to cost her everything. Marcus began the quiet work of protecting what was his, moving through their shared life like a ghost collecting pieces of his future. He transferred his direct deposit to a new account at a different bank, using his office address for statements. He removed his grandmother's wedding ring from Sophia's jewelry box, the one she never wore but refused to let him give to his niece aunt, placed it in a safety deposit box along with other family heirlooms that predated the marriage. He photographed every room in their house, documented every piece of furniture, cataloged every asset down to the coffee maker he'd brought into the marriage and the artwork they'd purchased together. The house itself was titled in both names, but Marcus had made the down payment from his inheritance, a fact he'd documented with bank statements Patricia assured him would matter. He even collected evidence of Sophia's affair from sources she didn't know existed. He reached out to the gym where she supposedly met Drew and discovered her membership had actually expired 4 months ago, meaning every workout since then had been a blatant lie. The gym manager, sympathetic to Marcus's situation, provided a signed statement confirming the lapsed membership. Marcus also contacted Drew's employer, a detail he'd gleaned from Sophia's saved message. Zand learned, through careful conversation with HR, that Drew was married with 2 children. A fact that made Marcus's next decision feel less like revenge and more like justice for multiple families. He obtained Drew's wife's contact information through social media. A woman named Alina, whose profile showed a life as carefully constructed and blissfully ignorant as Marcus's had been. But the real bomb was still waiting to drop. Marcus sent Alina a carefully worded message, not accusatory, but concerned, attaching only enough evidence to prove he wasn't a crazy stranger. But not so much that she'd warned Drew before Marcus could execute his plan. They met at a coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 wounded people bound by the same betrayal. And Elena's reaction mirrored Marcus's own journey. Shock, denial, anger, and finally, cold determination. "What do you want to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I want them to face consequences," Marcus replied. "Real ones. Not just losing us, but losing everything they risked us for." They coordinated their timelines, agreed to file for divorce simultaneously, and planned a confrontation that would strip away every comfortable lie their spouses had built. Alina, it turned out, was a corporate attorney herself, sharp, calculating, and now motivated by a fury that matched Marcus's own. She'd already suspected Drew's infidelity, but had been gathering her own evidence, and their collaboration created an ironclad case against both cheaters. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his performance at home, enduring Sophia's lies with a patience he didn't know he possessed. She announced her girls' weekend with practiced enthusiasm, showed Marcus the fake hotel confirmation she'd created, even packed her suitcase in front of him with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been caught. Marcus helped her carry the suitcase to her car, kissed her goodbye, told her to have fun, and watched her drive away toward a weekend that would never happen the way she'd planned. She thought she'd deleted the evidence of her affair, but the cloud never forgets, and neither would Marcus. Marcus waited exactly 3 hours after Sophia, left long enough for her to reach the airport hotel where she was meeting Drew B, for he executed Phase 1. He'd hired a private investigator named James Kowalski, a former police detective who specialized in surveillance, and James had been tailing Sophia since she left the house. At precisely 3:47 p.m., James sent Marcus's photos, Sophia and Drew checking into the Riverside Resort under Drew's name, embracing in the parking lot, entering a room together. Marcus forwarded the photos to Patricia with a timestamp, creating real-time documentation of adultery that would hold up in any court. Then he sent a single message to Sophia's phone. "I know you're not at a spa with the girls. I know everything. Check your email." The email he'd sent contained a zip file of screenshots, messages she thought she'd deleted, transactions she thought he'd never notice, GPS data showing every location she'd really been when she claimed to be elsewhere. He didn't call, didn't text again, just let the evidence speak for itself, while he imagined her face going pale in that hotel room, her hands shaking as she opened file after file of her own destruction. 30 minutes later, his phone exploded with calls and texts from Sophia, first panicked, then angry, then pleading, but Marcus ignored every one. He'd said everything he needed to say in that email, which had ended with a single line: "My attorney will be in touch. Don't come home." But the real devastation was just beginning. While Sophia was frantically trying to reach Marcus, Alina was executing her own confrontation with Drew, showing up at the hotel with her own folder of evidence and a photographer to document his reaction. The scene, as James reported back to Marcus, was spectacular. Drew, caught between 2 betrayals. Sophia, realizing she wasn't the only life being destroyed, both of them understanding in real time that their affair had been exposed from every angle with the kind of thorough documentation that ended careers and marriages. Alina had already contacted Drew's employer, filing a formal complaint about his misuse of company resources, the business trips that weren't, the expense reports that covered affair-related costs, and Drew was suspended pending investigation by the time he returned to his car. Marcus, meanwhile, had changed the locks on his house, moved Sophia's belongings into a storage unit he'd rented in her name, and arranged for the divorce papers to be served to her at her parents' house where she'd inevitably flee. He'd also contacted Sophia's employer, a prestigious marketing firm where she held a senior position, and informed them through Patricia's careful legal language that Sophia had been using company time and resources for personal matters, substantiated by GPS data showing her locations during claimed work hours. The firm launched their own investigation, and while Marcus didn't want to destroy Sophia's career, he wanted her to understand that actions have consequences, that betrayal doesn't exist in a vacuum. By Friday evening, Sophia had lost her marriage, her home, her paramour, and potentially her reputation at work. But Marcus wasn't finished yet. The divorce papers Patricia filed were a masterpiece of legal warfare. Marcus sought full reimbursement of the marital funds Sophia had dissipated on her affair, equitable distribution that accounted for his larger financial contribution to the marriage, and even damages for emotional distress based on her intentional deception. The filing included exhibits hundreds of pages of evidence that painted a clear picture of prolonged, calculated betrayal. Patricia also filed for temporary orders that froze Sophia's access to their joint accounts, preventing her from draining what remained before the divorce was finalized. Sophia hired an attorney, a mediocre lawyer named Phil Brennan, who came recommended by her brother, and their first attempt at negotiation. Phil tried to argue that Sophia deserved 50% of everything, that the affair was irrelevant to asset division, that Marcus was being vindictive. Patricia calmly presented the forensic accounting, the evidence of financial infidelity, the documented lies, and watched Phil's bluster deflate like a punctured tire. "Your client stole from the marriage to fund an affair," Patricia said, her voice ice. She transferred money, she lied about expenses, she deliberately hid assets. "In this state, that matters. We can do this the easy way, where she accepts responsibility and we negotiate fairly. Or we can do this in court, where every text message, every hotel receipt, every lie gets read into public record." Her choice. Marcus sat beside Patricia in that conference room, watching Sophia across the table, her face pale, her eyes red. Her entire demeanor shattered and felt nothing but a distant, cold satisfaction. But the final reveal was still to come. The settlement negotiations took 6 weeks, and with every passing day, Sophia's position weakened while Marcus's strengthened. Richard's forensic audit was so thorough that Sophia couldn't dispute a single number, couldn't claim ignorance about transfers she'd personally initiated. Drew's wife Alina was pursuing her own divorce, and the parallel cases created a paper trail that corroborated every detail of the affair. Same dates, same locations, same pattern of deception. Sophia tried once to contact Marcus directly, showing up at his office with tears and apologies, talking about counseling and second chances. But Marcus looked at her with the same detachment he'd give a stranger. "You didn't want a second chance," he said quietly. "You wanted more time to plan your exit while spending my money on another man. You wanted to leave me after securing your half of everything I built. The only thing you're sorry about is getting caught." She opened her mouth to protest, but Marcus simply walked away, leaving her standing in the lobby with security escorting her out. The final settlement gave Marcus the house's down payment had been substantial enough that equity was disproportionate. Sophia had to reimburse him for half of the $47,000 she'd taken, paid from her share of their remaining joint assets. She kept her retirement account and her car. But the dream life she'd been planning with Drew evaporated when Drew's wife took him for everything in their own divorce. Sophia moved into a modest apartment across town, her reputation damaged at work, her social circle fractured by the truth of what she'd done, her carefully constructed double life reduced to rubble. But Marcus was just beginning to rebuild. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Marcus stood in his home legally. His alone no-and felt something he hadn't experienced in over a year: peace. The rooms looked different without Sophia's presence, emptier but somehow lighter, as if removing her had lifted a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. He'd redecorated slowly, deliberately, turning their shared space into his own sanctuary. The guest room where she'd brought Drew became his home gym. The kitchen, where she'd lied over countless dinners, became a space where Marcus cooked for himself and occasionally for friends who'd stood by him through the divorce. He'd started therapy, not because he was broken, but because he wanted to process the betrayal without carrying bitterness into whatever came next. His therapist, Dr. Sarah Hendricks, helped him understand that Sophia's choices said everything about her character and nothing about his worth. That being blindsided, didn't make him foolish, made him trusting. And trust wasn't a weakness, even when it was exploited. Marcus also reconnected with parts of himself he'd neglected during the marriage. He joined a cycling club, traveled to Iceland on a solo trip he'd always wanted to take, invested in his friendships with an intentionality he'd let slip. He heard through mutual acquaintances that Sophia struggled after the divorce. Her relationship with Drew had imploded under the weight of their exposed affair. Her reputation at work never fully recovered. Her family relationships strained by the lies she'd told everyone. Marcus felt no satisfaction in her suffering, just a quiet acknowledgement that consequences were real. But his own life was expanding in ways he'd never imagined. 1 year after discovering Sophia's betrayal, Marcus met someone new, a woman named Iris, who owned a bookstore downtown and had no connection to his past life. Their first date was coffee and conversation, and when Iris asked about his divorce, Marcus was honest without being bitter. "My ex-wife made choices that ended our marriage. I made choices that protected my future. I don't regret fighting for what was mine, and I don't regret walking away from someone who didn't value what we had." Iris appreciated his directness, his lack of victim mentality, his clear-eyed understanding of his own worth. They took things slow, and Marcus appreciated the patience, the ability to build something new without the shadow of betrayal hanging over every moment. He still had the evidence stored away, all those messages, all those receipts, all that documentation of Sophia's affair, not because he wanted to revisit the pain, but because it reminded him of his own strength, his ability to face devastation and come out whole. Some nights he thought about the moment he'd found those deleted messages, remembered the way his world had collapsed, and marveled at the distance he'd traveled from that broken place. Sophia had tried to hide her affair by deleting the evidence, but she'd forgotten that truth has a way of surviving deletion. That betrayal leaves traces in places cheaters never think to look. Marcus had found those traces, documented them, used them to protect himself. And in doing so, he'd learned the most important lesson of all. Self-respect isn't negotiable. And some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness, they deserve consequences. Trust is earned, maintained through actions, and destroyed by lies. Betray it, and you'll learn why some people should never be underestimated. Have you ever had to choose between forgiveness and protecting yourself?